I want to, move ahead and ask the panelists to think about, what is happening next for Moldova. And it looks likely that Moldova would follow the Ukrainian scenario, unfortunately, the post-Orange Revolution scenario, because of the fragmentation of the opposition parties. And it might be a situation when Moldovan party would not be able to, to go forward, create a coalition, and so and probably could be one of the opportunity for Moldova would be to look outside the country for other players. And if so, if this is true, who are other players outside who might play a positive role in moving Moldova forward? And what role do you see for these players to play? Thank you.
I think to Vlad's question, I'm wondering about,
Could you identify yourself?
I'm Edmund Rose of the National Democratic Institute. We all have read and heard a lot about the relations with Romania and how complicated and difficult they've been, particularly around the time of elections. But I'm also thinking about in the last elections, there was a group of the European Network of Election Monitoring Organizations that tried to field international monitors from a dozen different countries around the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. And they were denied accreditation. There was a delegation from Georgia that was put in detention for 24 hours and sent back to Georgia. The delegation was basically returned back to the various countries from which they came. I'm wondering, is this, would you characterize this as related to just extreme election paranoia, and given all the political tensions that are existing in Moldova, or is this a greater concern? Should we be worried about Moldova becoming more isolationist, with the exception of Russia? Is there a greater concern there? I'm just curious what the panel would think of that.
I'm Pamela Smith. I was U.S. Ambassador to Moldova in the early 2000s. And I have a question for Mr. O'Neill and, well, everybody, I guess. Adding on to what Vlad said, how do you see the dynamics of the coalition forming, and what role do you see Mr. Lupu playing in those dynamics? Also, I'm interested in whether the demographics of Moldova are changing. It used to be that the rural voters were mostly communist and the urban voters were everything else. Is that still the case? And if not, how is it changing?
I'll take the last question, and I know we're running out of time. Mr. Gallo, I apologize.
Ed Joseph.
Edward Joseph.
I'm director
I'm with the commission. Yeah. Sorry, Kyle. I'll take your encouragement to ask a question, and also to thank our participants coming from Moldova. Mulțumesc. Thank you very much for coming. And I apologize if I missed this answer, Mr. Galbraith, but we heard very serious allegations from Representative Kushner, who's a member of your parliament, and I was just wondering if you have any reaction to those. Thank you.
With regard to Ms. Smith's question, could you also speak to the role of... my name is Teddy Himmler, and I'm an undergraduate at Harvard, and I'm an intern here. And with regard to Ambassador Smith's question, could you also speak to the role that the youth vote has played, as you've seen in the 2008 U.S. elections, and also in recent unrest in Iran? The youth has played a big role. Now, whether it's because of changing demographics or technology, could you speak to what role you may see for the youth in the future of Moldova?
I guess I'll start. Mr. Smith, good to see you here. You asked about the coalition and the politics of the coalition. I just have to say at the outset that it's very important that the Moldovans do subsume their egos and get it together quickly. It's very important for the good of the country that some kind of working government be formed very, very quickly to move ahead with reform. You have to strike while the iron is hot in these situations, as we've seen from neighboring countries. There are tensions, however, between the opposition leaders. We know that. And those will play out going forward. We know the discussions are underway. They have already leaked certain positions that have been, in principle, allocated. Whether that will happen or not is hard to say. At this point, it doesn't look like Mr. Lupu is going to, with his 13 votes, join with the Congress 48 to from 61 to elect the president. It doesn't look that way right now, but it's far from clear what can happen. And I would be ill-advised to take the prognosis right now on that issue. But I would like to address more detailed the demographic issue, which is very, very important, both for your question and the colleague here's question about that, because first of all, it's important to note that 35,000 more people voted in the dead of summer on a weekday in these elections than in April. That shows that people are, and I think young people, are fired up about this and interested in what's going on in Moldova. Second, I think that there is still that split between rural, older voter for the communists and younger urban voters voting right, center. And that means that as time goes by, of course, the advantage will be gathering for the center and center-right coalitions in terms of just pure demographical split. What remains an open question, and I think the most interesting one, is what happens to the people who are returning from being overseas workers to Moldova in great numbers? Can they be tapped to be a political force? Who will tap them? Will the economy be so bad that they may be disenchanted? Will whoever's in power now, as I suggested in my remarks, be so burdened with a bad economy that may backfire on their success and they may be punished by voters? These are the questions. It seems like in the April protests there were a number of people, at least anecdotally I've heard from colleagues in Moldova, who had just come back from overseas. And a lot who had come back from Russia because Russia's had great contraction in its construction industry and other industries. And so how those people are tapped or where their alliance falls will be very interesting to watch.
My response concerning who can the other players be and what is going to happen after this election in Moldova is really limited to that, to saying that it is up now to all the parties that have passed the threshold, that are part of this new parliament, to display the appropriate amount of wisdom and solidarity with the national interest of the Moldovan people, of the country, and act in those best interests. Concerning the NMO question, I cannot go into the specific details because I do not have that information. However, I do know that out of the list there was a part of observers that were accepted, that were accredited by the Central Electoral Committee. I believe it was 53 observers, and there were 87 observers that were denied accreditation based on the relevant decision of the CEC. I cannot go into the specifics because I simply do not know them.
Oh, sure. I'd just like to comment on that particular issue because what's most troubling and interesting about that deportation of the Georgians was that the Georgians had a right to enter Moldova on a visa-free regime, even if they were not accredited as observers. And so it was puzzling that they were actually detained and held for 24 hours and deported when they could legally enter the country without being observers, just as tourists or whatever.
And they have been invited by name.
Well, you're not even getting that far.
And if I could say something on the youth role question, which is definitely a good question. I do not know the specific details of how much of the young population actually voted in this election, but I can speak for the polling section that was open at the embassy. We had 308 people that expressed their vote in Washington, D.C. There were 317 people in New York at the polling station there, and the overwhelming majority of them were young people, mostly students that are here on the work and travel program. Almost half of those who voted were young people. So it's a good sign.